So welcome everyone to the to the session on self-compassion. What we're really talking about here is self-love or boundless kindness towards oneself. And I mentioned this in previous sessions and in the Go Boomerang groups as well. So again, welcome to Janice and Barb from the Go Boomerang sessions, and they're joining us here in the Sangha tonight. So I was talking about it as, one of the wings of a bird, but as was so rightly pointed out, really it's wisdom and compassion that are spoken of traditionally in the Buddha's teachings of the two wings of the bird. So we could maybe call it two pillars. I would look at it, and this is just something I've come to, is self-kindness, or it could be called self-compassion, is one pillar of the practice, and mindfulness being the other pillar. And I think it's very difficult to practice mindfulness, that being present with whatever's arising moment by moment, non-judgmentally, without self-compassion, because we're opening to difficulties, to stress, to suffering in our lives. And in order, I think, to do that, we have to do it with the self-compassion that I've been speaking about, and that I spoke about and guided you in the guided meditation. So you could, and this is how I really like to put it, you could say that self-compassion involves acting the same way towards yourself as you would your very best friend or loved one. When you're having a difficult time, you fail, notice something you don't like about yourself, and so forth, you bring this same kind of kindness towards yourself as you would your very best friend or a loved one. So instead of ignoring, like in mindfulness, we don't ignore our pain and difficulties, right? We don't have this, what you could call a stiff upper lip mentality, where we, grin and bear it. Is that the saying? And and all kinds of sayings, soldier on, and so on. It's we don't approach our pain, suffering with that mentality. We actually open to it. If you think about it, in order to open to it, to really open our hearts to our difficulties, our failures, it must be done, I believe, with a sense of self-kindness. So we can just tell ourselves, this is really difficult right now. Just by acknowledging that is in itself very powerful. And how can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? So we can get lost in our own self-criticism. So we instead look at moving towards self-kindness. So you could ask, why are we so self-critical? Why do we even engage in self-criticism? Right? We might believe to some extent that we need self-criticism to motivate ourselves, right? That if we're too kind to ourselves, then we might get self-indulgent and lazy. That might be a belief. Research actually shows the opposite. And we can probably also see this in our experience, that it doesn't motivate us. I'll give you an example. Two parents, and their son comes home with a failing grade on a math test. Okay, so a young student getting a failing grade on a math test. So the parent has two ways to to respond to this, to, you could say, even and to motivate. They could use harsh criticism. Would be one way. I'm ashamed of you. You're what a loser you are. You'll never amount to anything. That, and just hearing that might make you cringe, right? Just hearing those words, but perhaps that might be the type of language that we sometimes use with ourselves. We can actually get that critical of ourselves. So what's going to happen with the son with that kind of harsh criticism? He'll probably lose faith in himself. He'll feel failure. He'll probably, really not want to put himself out there because the result of making a mistake is so severe or dire that there's such a fear of failure and lost faith in themselves. So what if the parent took a compassionate approach instead of the harsh approach? Said, oh, I'm so sorry that this happened. You must be hurting. Here, give me a hug. I still love you. This happens happens to all of us. It could happen to anyone. And I know that you want to get good marks. How can I help you with that? Very different scenario, right? And which scenario do you think would be more motivating? Which would be more motivating? So this is the kind of compassionate approach that we can also bring to ourselves. So really tuning into this self criticism that arises. Now the Buddha actually didn't talk, as far as I know, about self-compassion. He spoke about compassion. And in fact, there was really an assumption within the teachings that self-compassion was present. It was kind of a necessary underpinning of the practice. I think because of perhaps our culture and the self-criticism that might be more prevalent in our culture, that self-compassion has become a major thrust in the mindfulness movement. There's a lot of opportunities to cultivate self-compassion in North America and Europe, Australia, places like that. There's a center for mindful self-compassion that's got a continual offering of courses that you can take on just on cultivating self-compassion. So that's a center for mindful self-compassion, and there's other places to take these kinds of programs. But the Buddha didn't emphasize that. In fact, a lot of the fake quotes that are on floating around the internet, there's fake Buddha quotes, quite a few of them. Many of them are actually revolve around things that are attributed to the Buddha around self-compassion, which is interesting, right? In fact, I had a whole bunch of them, and then I realized that I started to slowly. It was pointed out to me, many years ago. Oh, that's not really the Buddha never said that. I go, oh, really? Well, it's such a beautiful quote, and so people are great at making up beautiful quotes or finding them somewhere and then attributing them. But I think part of that is just a recognition that we need a heavy dose of self-compassion in our culture, especially in conjunction with mindfulness. Kristen Neff, and for folks that have followed me along Go Boomerang, I've spoken about this, the three components of self-compassion that Kristen Neff, Neff, talks about, and that's self-kindness versus self-judgment, which I've spoken about a little bit, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus identification. So, self-kindness seems kind of self-explanatory in a way. It's being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer or feel inadequate. So it's that tenderness that we were touching into in the guided meditation. And there's different ways to touch into this, and I'll talk about that. To touch in and feel where this tender, a warm understanding towards ourselves resides. So we notice when self-judgment arises, and we move towards kindness. And if we do this over and over again, it becomes a new habit loop, right? The habit can be when a difficulty arises, when we feel inadequate or failed, make a mistake. The habit can be self-kindness instead of self-judgment. Self-judgment just doesn't have a good result, doesn't motivate, it creates more anxiety and more difficulties. So when we can accept things as they are with this kindness, then the factor of enlightenment that's called equanimity can arise. So that's a key part of equanimity, is accepting things as they are with kindness, self-kindness. So when there's self-kindness, we're able to open and allow our present moment experience. I did a fair bit of work with self-compassion. I've never taken one of those programs, but it pointed out, through numerous at different retreats with different teachers, that the importance of self-compassion in order to open to my experience. The second characteristic is common humanity. That this being human, and this is really the first noble truth, is that we all beings suffer, including ourselves. It's part of being human that things will go off the rails, mistakes will be made, failures, we'll fail at things. So it's part of being human, and realizing this, it does a couple of things. It can release self-judgment, right? It can release the shame and fear around our mistakes. Look, sometimes we can think that we're the only person making mistakes, or the only person suffering. So the self-compassion recognizes that all human beings suffer and make mistakes. It's all part of being human. It's not a mistake, not a failure. It means we're human. Being human means we're mortal, we're vulnerable, we're imperfect, we're all of those things. So it's something that happens to all humans, and not something that only happens to a me. And this is huge. Just this, and I've often said, just recognizing the first noble truth that dukkha, which is the Buddha's word for, it gets translated to suffering, that part of being a human being is that we will experience dukkha. It's unavoidable. Just that recognition can be very transforming and freeing. So I think that's a key part of, as does Kristen Neff, as a characteristic of self-compassion. And the third one that she talks about is mindfulness versus identification. So mindfulness, we kind of place our situation within a larger perspective. We can observe our negative thoughts, difficult emotions, and with openness and clarity, so that they're held in mindful awareness. So we're observing, we're not denying. And in order to observe, and in order to allow, first we have to allow, not suppress or deny. So first we allow. In order to allow it, we have to open to it. And to do so, we have to have that self-compassion. So it means we're not over-identified, right? That's why Kristen calls it mindfulness versus identification. So we're not over-identified with the thoughts and feelings and caught up with them as me and mine and poor me, and this swept away by this negative reactivity. Yeah, so that's the mindful part of it. So how do you cultivate? I'll finish with that. How we cultivate, and this is sort of how we always approach this. I in the guided meditation, I directed you towards thinking of a loved one, a dear friend, and sensing into the love and kindness, or the love that you and compassion that you feel towards them, and then immediately seeing where that resides as a physical sense in the body. For many people, it resides in the heart space, but it's not the same for everyone. Some people it's more spacious and resides in throughout the body, maybe in the head, or maybe in the belly. It can be very different for different people, but sensing into that is a key part of the practice, so that we can kind of call upon that tender place when we're experiencing a difficulty. Another way is to I've heard people use this in guided meditations to to envision yourself as an infant or a child. I did this for some time. I had this picture of myself, a really cute picture of myself as a child, just so innocent, and I would hold that image in my mind's eye, and again feel into the kindness and compassion that would arise. And for some people, they can feel into their heart space and the beating of their heart, and that can be enough to sense into, to inhabit this space of kindness and compassion. I don't know if I've read this poem before. I'm going to read a poem here by Jeff. I know I've read some of Jeff Foster's poems in the past. And I've been recently quite taken by his by his poetry. Here's one entitled "If Abandonment is the Core Wound" by Jeff Foster. If abandonment is the core wound, the disconnection from mother, the loss of wholeness, then the most potent medicine is this ancient commitment to never abandon yourself, to discover the wholeness in the whole mess, to be a loving mother to your insides, to hold the broken bits in open awareness, to illuminate the sore places with the light of love. That, for me, sums up the the practice of opening, the ancient commitment to never abandon yourself and to discover wholeness in the whole mess. So he's pointing to that notion of the whole mess. Being human can get messy. So we're discovering wholeness, the interconnection, you could say, within that, the messiness of being human. And just holding our broken bits, the cracked, sore places, however you want to speak of it, in open awareness with the light of love. So he's really pointing to the convergence of holding our difficulties in open awareness and doing so with the light of self-love. Christina, my daughter's name is Christina, so Kristen is going to be Christina, but her name's Kristen Neff, with a K, Kristen Neff. Has on her website a variety of beautiful self-compassion exercises, just a real wide variety, and I invite you to explore those. Just go to Kristen Neff's website and look for practice. I believe it's under resources and then practices, and there's a dozen or so beautiful practices that are meant to help cultivate self-compassion. And here's one of them. It's called the self-compassion break. So think of a situation in your life that is difficult, that's causing you stress at the moment. So not the biggest, don't pick, if you're experiencing some big difficulty right now, you might not want to choose that one, but something in your life that is, I guess you could call a minor difficulty that you can engage in a short practice with, that's causing you stress. So just calling that situation to mind. And if you don't have a current situation, I guess you could think of a past situation, calling it to mind, and seeing if you can actually feel the stress and emotional discomfort in your body. So if you're coming along with me in this exercise, there's probably some tension in the body right now that's arisen just from conjuring up a stressful situation in your mind's eye. So now say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. So that's the mindfulness part. We're just acknowledging that this is a moment of suffering. This is dukkha. This is stress. So there's acknowledgement to the common humanity part. Is the second step. So the first is this is a moment of suffering. The second is suffering is a part of life. This happens to all human beings. We're not alone. We all have struggles in our lives. So suffering is a part of life. Now you can, then the next stage is kind of the self-caring part. Some people put their hands over their heart space, feel the warmth of their hands and the gentle touch on their chest, kind of a soothing touch, and say to yourself, may I be kind to myself. What do I need right now to express kindness to myself? This could be, whatever the situation is, may I be patient. May I accept myself just the way I am. Whatever needs to be said to bring kindness towards towards yourself in that moment. So this kind of 3-step practice can be used at any time during the day or night. So number 1 is just recognizing that this is a moment of suffering, of stress. Number 2 is that this suffering or stress is a part of being human. And the third is, how can I be kind towards myself in this situation? I think that of all her exercises, that one really encapsulates how we practice self-kindness. Yeah. So when we're reactive, right, which happens, no matter how much we practice, it happens. We can just notice that it's happening and bring that self-kindness towards ourselves. Notice that we're suffering. Notice that this happens know that this happens to everyone, and then bring self-care to ourselves in that moment, rather than self-judgment. So I'll open it up for any questions or comments that folks might have.